we're going to go ahead and get started because I have to leave promptly at 6 because I have another meeting after this. So welcome everyone to our AAUP sponsored event. Talking about the students as consumers metaphor. We have with us today our special guests who are all students at EKU. And just to run through them quickly, we have Courtney Allen, who, if you can, raise your hands, is a English major here at EKU. And I asked them all, is there anything else important we need to know about them? She identifies as a first-generation college student. So she's had to figure out a lot on her own, as is common with first-gen students. Walker Becker is sitting next to Courtney, is also an English major and also a first-generation college student. And then Addie Turner is sitting next to both of them, is a double major in English and communication studies. And then joining us on Zoom, our final student participant is Callahan. Did I get that right?
Yes, you did.
Thank you. Okay, good. And Kayla is a grad student in our Master of Social Work program. And so now I have to, and I am Dr. Gerald Nachtwey of the English department. And I'll be moderating today. So the question that we're taking up today, there it is the student as consumer metaphor. And I actually gave homework to all the students who are participating. They've worked hard to be our panelists today. And I thought these two quotes pretty well set out the question at stake today. And so we have Luke Hobson, who is a professional consultant who works with various institutions of higher ed around the country, making the case that higher education institution and a business are not the same, but providing the best kind of support and experience should be universal regardless of the model. The institutions that are currently thriving today seem to have this kind of incredible experience mentality. They have figured out how to create a customer experience that blends with the priority around education. And so this is the idea that if we want to actually serve students, we need to think of them as consumers of education and provide them with whatever it is that they're coming that they need. By contrast, and this is, and I'm giving away the game a little bit here, this is an AAUP event, and this is from an AAUP publication, Academe. But Miguel Martinez Sáenz and Stephen Schonover, I'm going to say, make the case in their article, Resisting the Students as Consumer Metaphor, the dominance of the market model in universities is the dominance of the false idea that the consumer alone can adequately speak in the name of education. Students cannot hope to do this, but neither can the administration or the faculty. To elevate any one group to the level of sovereign is effectively to enshrine the current and unfortunate fact that no one effectively speaks in the name of education, which is sounds bleak, but actually is great, right? Because they're calling for real meaningful discourse and dialogue on this topic of what it is that we should be doing as universities, as institutions of higher education. Now, that said, we all know that in practice, it's students who do most of the listening and professors who do most of the professing. And so as an AAUP chapter, we thought it would be great to take up this issue and actually give students as much of a voice as possible. And so this is what kind of set up the event for today, having this student panel with us to give their opinions on really what we have are two fundamental questions. And what we're going to do is pose each of the questions to the students. I may or may not have a follow-up question or two, depending upon their answers. And then once we get through each of these fundamental questions, which have to do with the student as consumer model and with the notion of higher education as a public good, what is the role of higher education? Then we're going to, with what time we have left, we're going to open it up to questions from the floor, from participants in general. I'm going to give Kayla pride of place as our one Zoom participant to help get you involved with this. So we will start with a question, Kayla. Should EKU view students as consumers of higher education?
As a student myself, the answer is no. I feel like that would take away from, it would be like a business transaction. and would take away from our ability to grow personally. And I feel like with that being said, it would cause other programs who are not making money or who are not getting as much students enrolled in. It would cause defunding for them, which I don't think would be a very good idea.
Okay, so first of all, I'm wondering, you're a little fuzzy on your reception on our end. So maybe, and I hate to say this, but maybe try turning your camera off.
Okay.
Are you okay? And the two things that I did catch is that you're concerned that you would not be having the experience that you actually need, which was one of the claims that was made in the AAUP article from Academe, but also concerns about funding. And I wondered if you could just say a little bit more about both, like why specifically would asking students what they want deprive them of an experience that they need? I think that was one of the more interesting parts of your answer.
I feel like asking students what they want wouldn't be an issue, but it would be an issue for students who are like, say, accounting. If we create it as like a consumer-based educational program where you're going in to buy something to get better future endeavors or higher finances, programs such as English or social work, I feel like those would lack enrollees, which would cause universities to think about, okay, do we need to have this or should we not have this? Because clearly students aren't enrolling as much into that program. So I would fear that social workers and English teachers or any type of teacher would end up losing out in the long run on that.
Okay, and that, yeah, okay, so you essentially answered the second part of that question. So that's the connection between if you leave everything sort of in the hands of basically supply and demand economics, that's not only going to determine what curricula are being offered within existing programs, but it's also going to delimit the number or the types of programs that are being offered to only the most popular or only the most sort of economically viable, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Kayla. We will come
You're
back.
welcome.
I'm gonna move to my left here to Addie, and you have the same question. I'm gonna hand you the mic. Okay, so here you go. Should EKU view students as consumers of higher education?
In true big nerd fashion, I've brought notes, so please pardon the laptop. I am trying to be present and engaged. My brain just also feels a little bit like soup today, so figured I'd reference. In my opinion, I think students are kind of this dual role of consumers and the continual torchbearers of higher education. They're doing both. They are somehow both the product and the consumer. We are the product to the university because what are they looking for? Tuition rates, enrollment numbers to go up. But we are also the very thing that keeps the university running outside of the fantastic faculty. And so I think there is an element of exchange that students see as, with college being an investment of time and energy with the promised return of a more lucrative position or more specialized career opportunities, which in some cases is true. I think in a lot of hyper-specialized STEM fields or medical fields, that's often what you're going to find. I did a little bit of external research, again, speaking on my nerd podium here. There was a study published by the Burning Glass Institute and Strata Education Foundation last year, which said that around 52% of college graduates are working jobs that don't require a degree at all, and only earn roughly 25% more than those working without college diplomas at all. However, folks who are working degree-appropriate jobs with a diploma earn nearly 90% more than those who only have high school diplomas. So a degree is still inherently valuable, but only as far, I think, as the job that you can get into with it, which is going to be highly dependent on the student, not as much on the university. I also have interacted with a variety of folks who give a whole bunch of reasons for being in college in the first place, including personal development, career opportunities, holding a degree at all, social networking opportunities, and delaying of entering a career field or the quote-unquote real world, which is the least common, but I still do interact with folks who have that mindset. I think that the core of my thought is that students who view higher education as a complete personal development alongside a professional opportunity are going to feel less burdened by being viewed as consumers than those who are just here to get a degree, where that may feel very frustrating.
So you think that the students who are here more just for their credential are the ones who are less likely to want to be viewed as consumers?
I think so. Mostly because of statistics like that, where there's a high level of frustration with, what do you mean I gave you money? I have this piece of paper and I'm not guaranteed to make a whole bunch more money. Yeah, rather than viewing it as a holistic approach of, oh, well, I may get personal experience, I may have valuable networking opportunities, I may meet really important social groups. If you're only here for the one thing and the one thing doesn't deliver, I can see that being an extreme point of contention. And I think that's where a lot of people find college education to not be as valuable, quote unquote.
All right, extra credit for outside research. Excellent. Okay, Walker, as Walker and Courtney have the enviable and unenviable position now that they've heard the other two answers. So here you go.
All right. So in thinking about this question, I was really concerned with like the dynamics, like consumer versus like, I guess, producer of like good versus like, you know, student teacher. And I feel like they're very, very different. Like the consumer and then producer of good kind of dynamic is very transactional. It's very, you put in this, you get this out of it. But like the student professor dynamic is like a lot, it's like much more mutual. And it's more productive, I think, because of that. And I think shifting it to a more consumer and then like a service provider dynamic makes it more like a one-way street where someone's just saying, I want this. And then like they either get it or they can't. It also makes me think quite a bit about my experience like working in the service industry. And thinking about like how like consumers or like customers tend to interact with the people like providing them services. I worked at a restaurant for about 2 years, and I just don't feel like that's a dynamic that is helpful to place upon higher education. Just because like if you're going in somewhere as a customer or consumer, you don't really want to pay money to be made uncomfortable and to be made to like expand your horizons or have to like reflect and think, oh, do I need to change something? Do I need to grow some way? Do I need to ask questions? As a consumer, you kind of just expect everything to be handled for you. You figure that's what like it's the cost is paying for. I feel like if we apply that to college, it makes the student a much more passive like actor in education, and becoming a passive actor is like antithetical to like the very like premise of getting a higher education. You do have to put in the work and make yourself uncomfortable and seek out new experiences and constantly try to figure out like, what am I missing? What can I improve on? Things like that.
So there's a couple of people in the Zoom chat that have agreed with that sentiment.
Excellent. Okay, great. Well, and I guess as a quick, so you said, I mean, you just said a mouthful, basically. And, this notion of, I guess, that faculty members have these widgets that we call knowledge, and we are giving you the widgets and you are receiving the widgets, and that's the transactional experience that you were talking about, versus the notion, I like what you were saying about being uncomfortable. This goes, I'm conscientious of Professor Gooch being sitting behind me, but I mean, I'm sort of hearing Socrates in this, right? Like the notion that you actually learn by being put in uncomfortable situations. I'm wondering if you could speak to that, just in your own experience, not to put you on the, it doesn't have to be a specific example, but is that kind of what it has been more like for you at EKU, like being challenged and being actually like put in uncomfortable situations, but then growing or learning because of it?
I definitely feel like that's my experience at EKU so far, at least within the English department. I enter most of my classes not having a lot of prior information on the topics that they're about. Drama, for instance, I'm not a big drama head. I never have been, but I'm taking modern drama right now, and I do feel like I'm expanding my horizons. I'm learning to talk about characters in different ways and like empathize with different sorts of people who take different sorts of actions. This is just the example I'm using because I'm in this class right now. But if I were just like thinking about it like, okay, I'm getting a product from this school, I don't know if I would necessarily choose modern drama with my lack of knowledge about it that I had going in. And I would lose out on a really valuable experience, and I would lose out on, you know, learning about something that I'm turning out to really enjoy and be very interested in.
Okay, Courtney, you know the question by now, so give us your answer.
I kind of agree. I guess when I first heard this question, I was kind of in the middle because as a first generation student, kind of, you know, from what I've heard from my parents is that college is, it kind of is like that transactional, you know, action. You just give them the money, they give you the skills to get a job and, you know, make a return on investment pretty much. And so I kind of did get that point of view for a little bit, you know, what's the logic of paying for a pretty expensive experience just to, you know, just for the life experience, I guess, or something like that. But I do think when you think of it more of, you know, that mindset that you are just the consumer of it, you're not, like kind of what Addie said, you're not the product, like you're not the thing that the employers want or that the universities want. You should want them, kind of. That's just kind of a disheartening way, I guess, of looking at it. I don't know if there's like an action we can take that's like, you know, set this into place and change that. It's more just of the mindset that employers or university students have. As an English major, I feel like I've experienced, you know, we kind of, English majors, I feel like we kind of have to get used to, you know, we don't go into English expecting like this specific job. Like someone used the example of accounting, you know, going into that degree, you have a specific field in mind. Like, you know, you expect what you're going to do. I feel like in the English program, I've just kind of like what Walker said, you experience things that you don't really understand the value of at first, you know, like Shakespeare or early British literature. You kind of enter those thinking, okay, what's the point of this? Like, how does this affect me? But it's more of just like shaping your worldviews, growing as a person, just shaping you in more ways than just being just being an employee, I guess, just being kind of like a cog in the system, pretty much.
Yeah, and I think what you said, Courtney, about that your position actually kind of changed even as you were thinking about the question. That connects back to the Luke Hobson article that I had the students look at, because, and he was actually saying that, you know, this model is a valid one, but even in his own research, he found that on the face of it, when they initially asked students, do you think it's good to treat students as consumers of education, with the idea of the consumer always being right, and that students were quite on board with that, precisely because they felt like they didn't have agency and voice in their classes. In other words, to some extent, this was wanting to get back at faculty or administrators who had in some way done them wrong, but that actually the more students, upper class students, and then the more students were sort of given to think about this, those rates of agreement went down as students think more about what the educational experience actually entails. And I think that that's pretty telling. And, you know, I think you spoke to that in your own answer. Well, I'm going to go ahead and, instead of asking Courtney a follow-up question, if this works, we're going to move on to the second question. And then this will be a sort of natural segue into our broader discussion when we open up the floor. And this is a more abstract question. What is higher education's responsibility to society? So Courtney, you get to field this one first. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Someone, Dr. Callahan had mentioned, it seems like there is a risk of resentment toward a professor who does not give a product, and within certain criteria, timeliness, utilitarian, et cetera, that perspective objectifies the human experience of teaching, learning, as well as those involved in the process. And then Kelly mentioned, at a fundamental level, it is not how humans actually learn.
Yeah, and I think that kind of speaks to what Walker was saying earlier as well. Yeah, no, thanks. And hold on to those comments for after we get through the panelists, and we should absolutely have time for a broader discussion. But go ahead, Courtney, field the question.
It is kind of an abstract question. Kind of what my perspective is, and I've kind of talked about this with Dr. Nachtwey beforehand. I believe that viewing higher education sort of as just this, you know, you need to do it to be prepared to be an employee, is kind of a bleak way of looking at it, just seeing it as, you know, when you graduate, you need to be the perfect employee, basically. You just need to be what the employers are looking for, or just, it sounds like kind of just, you know, perfectly trained, perfectly, you know, they're very knowledgeable in their fields. And as someone that started an English major to be an ESL teacher, which that field is already kind of, it doesn't require a whole lot. You just need a bachelor's pretty much, which might have also influenced my idea of, you know, just getting this to do this. So I would really hope that the purpose isn't to just pump out employees that are perfectly ready for their fields, just because in my experience, it really is the type of thing that you don't understand. And I would assume it's the same for all education majors, that you kind of learn the theories, you learn the ideas in practice, or like the ideas, but you don't really get that practice, that hands-on, like you don't really see it in the real, quote unquote, real world. And I just thought that was especially, maybe this is very like just a personal view of it, but for me, it's not that way at all. I expect when I graduate that there will still be a year or two, maybe more than that, where I'm still learning. I don't expect learning to stop when I graduate and get my diploma. I really hope that I get a job and I continue to learn. And hopefully that's something that doesn't just cut off.
Yeah, and I think a lot of what you're saying comes back to your experience as a first generation college student, because I know that there's a lot of pressure from families often on first generation college student. It's like you get your degree, you get your credential, and then the idea is, okay, now you're going to make big money, capital B, capital M. And it sounds like that's not really the goal, but to have maybe fulfillment in your work or to do something that you actually have some calling for. Is that right?
Yeah, that's kind of what you said. You know, my family, especially as, you know, parents that didn't go to college, didn't complete high school. It's kind of like I think they need it more for themselves, maybe, to know that it's like not a quote unquote waste, which I feel like I do understand that perspective. I understand, like, you know, people make sacrifices for education. They make sacrifices for their children to go to, you know, receive that education. So, you know, a lot of the times it's, you know, I go home and tell my parents about how, you know, I'm about to graduate, how college is going, and they'll say, okay, like pretend I'm a student and teach me English, like tell me about English. And I'm just like, well, it's not really how it works. You know, like I took language classes. I took Japanese at EKU. I learned a little bit of Korean in my own time. And it's like, you know, you tell them, oh, I'm learning this, and they'll just say like, oh, say this in Japanese. And if you can't, then like, what are they really teaching you? Like, what's our money going towards? So yeah, it's definitely a very sometimes disheartening point of view, and you get that not just from parents but from other people. But I understand it, I would like to say.
All right, Walker. You know what the question is. What is higher education's responsibility to society?
I feel like this question is interesting because, and I've heard it like in this room as other people have been like answering these questions, we kind of have an impulse to like separate like higher education like from the rest of society. We talk about like the real world and like separating like getting educated from like the job searching or the working process. But I feel like higher education isn't really like separate from society and it like is like beholden to it in some way. I feel like it's just a function of society. People will always want to learn more and they will always want to like expand their knowledge of things and do research to help each other. And higher education is where that happens. So I don't know. I kind of want to like make it like less abstract in a way. If I get an education here and I graduate and I stay in Richmond and I get a job doing a service to my community, I feel like higher education's responsibility has been fulfilled in that way. I'm contributing to society by virtue of continuing to exist in it and using all the knowledge that I got here to further serve society and like support it and contribute to it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I want to pick up on something you just said, and kind of Courtney was talking about it too, and I know we've talked about it in class, but you know, pushing back on the idea of higher education not being the real world. I mean, because first of all, I'm sure, you know, Kayla and Addie and Walker and Courtney and we got a student here in the room and any students that are on the Zoom call, I'm sure you all feel like you're in the ivory tower being at EKU, right? You know, like, but because actually, you know, in being in classes is about being put in uncomfortable situations and actually being forced to interact with other human beings and forced to interact with a diversity of other human beings. And a lot of that constitutes, you know, I just wonder if you could say more about your experience of being a student at EKU as being a reflection of society at large.
Using EKU as like a reflection of society is like, I feel like a pretty good place to start just because like it is like one of the most accessible universities in the state of Kentucky. I have met so many different types of people while being here. But also like I ended up moving to this city after I started going to school here after a few years. I've worked in this city at a couple different jobs. My friends live here that I met on EKU's campus. So it's kind of like, I'm going to move this over to like talking about like third spaces. If everyone's familiar with that concept, like a place, it's not work, it's not home, it's somewhere else to go and like be in public and interact with people. I feel like EKU kind of like serves that function. So you can meet people here, you can learn things here. It's just like another facet of like the world.
No, that was great. I'm going to check. Chris, do we have anything popping up on the chat? No. Okay. I feel like maybe I shut it down now, but hold your thoughts for after we're done. Okay, Addie, you know what the question is.
I'm going to do the objectively horrible thing of trying to answer this question very succinctly. I think if I had to say one and pin one up on the corkboard and say, do this at least, please, it would be produce critical thinkers. And I think because so much of the value that we see in society in being able to gain valuable jobs and being able to make important social connections and finding out what we're really about as people and developing as adults in the world is based off of being able to think critically, not just about ourselves and the context of our own lives, but about the lives outside of ours and about the world as a whole, about our career path, about the ways that we're affecting other people. And I think that if higher education has any responsibility, it is to foster critical thinking in that manner, because I think it ripple effects out into a lot of other spaces that we could say, oh, well, we really want them to affect this, we want them to affect this. But I think if we tried to identify a single point, it's a good place to start, at least.
Now, I'm not going to actually ask you to define what you mean by critical thinking, because I've been in enough meetings with faculty where we spend an hour and a half and can't come to a good definition of that. But it sounds curiously like the examples you were using, critical thinking sounds like it involves not just problem solving skills, but maybe like empathy or ethical responsibility. Do you think that that is also part of the process, part of what you're learning?
100%. Yeah. There's always the joke that you make a lot in class where we're teaching people to be like an extremist of, empathy and of a certain, social class or political class or whatever you like to joke about. But I think that there is definitely an inherent value, and we see a lot of trends on, how do people who are of higher education treat other people. Not always, good grief, there's a lot of exceptions, but I think by and large, there is some form of being exposed to so many different kinds of people at college, being exposed to so many kinds of situations that you've never encountered and you may never be in yourself. But being sat down in class and reading things like Huckleberry Finn or Tom Sawyer, reading from Black authors, reading from foreign languages that have been translated so that we can learn from them. I think it is just a broadening of horizon and of experience. And I think by doing that, you're inherently learning and understanding empathy in some capacity.
It warms my heart to hear you say that. Okay. Kayla, we're gonna finish up with you, and then we're gonna open it up to questions from listeners and audience members. But you know the question: what is higher education's responsibility to society?
So mine's not going to be like, I would say, very long or in depth. It's going to be very simple but straightforward. I feel that higher education's responsibility to society should be to continue to build lifelong learners. As everyone has mentioned, when we graduate college and we start our jobs, yeah, we'll have the basic knowledge of, for example, social work. I'll have the basic knowledge of it, but each county does things differently. For example, I work at Butler County now, and I've worked at Hamilton County in the past. Although they have the main goal of keeping children safe, they all operate differently. So I feel that if higher education just teaches us the basics and don't push us to continue to expand our horizons, when we go into the job field, it's going to be like a culture shock because we were not expected to learn anything past what the books are telling us.
No, that's great. And your response actually brings up two issues that I think are important to highlight. And the first is that Kayla is a graduate student. And I think that this notion of that this divide that some of our undergrads were talking about between the world of higher education and the quote unquote real world, that supposedly strong barrier breaks down even more when we talk about grad students. Because I mean, Kayla is already out there doing social work and she's getting her MSW as a credential so she can do that in a deeper and more diverse way, right? So
yeah.
The minute you start thinking about those kinds of contexts, this idea that somehow higher ed exists in some bubble outside of the real world really starts to fall apart. The other thing is that, and I don't want to press too much maybe at this moment on sort of thinking about higher ed as a capitalist structure, but I think what Kayla is saying is important, because if we really follow the transactional model that students are paying for knowledge and then they get knowledge that they can then go do a particular task, right? And this speaks to what Kayla was saying about lifelong learners. I've learned everything I need to do this particular task. Now my profession changes, society changes, and now I have to go back and get another credential, presumably is what the model wants. And so where I'm getting a quote unquote good deal on my highly practical degree, now in the long run is actually literally costing me more because of the way the system is set up, that I have to go back and get this credential. Whereas and I think critical thinking comes into this issue of lifelong learning. If I learn how to teach myself on the job to do different tasks, now that is no longer the case. But of course, that kind of education looks very different from this very transactional education, where it's like I'm learning how to do this one particular task, and then I go out and I do it for 5 years, and then I have to come back for retraining. And I think that for some, and I bring that up because I think for some people, some administrators maybe, that would be an ideal sort of world. And it's not to say that Kayla is a good example. She came back to get a graduate degree. We certainly see this happening in practice, but we also want people to sort of, graduate from higher education and then be prepared to be very productive and creative citizens, right? You know, broadly, I think, speaking to what some of Addie and Walker and Courtney were saying as well. Okay, I think we'll stop there. And then just if anybody, and we can open it up, I guess, if you want to stack in Zoom so we can actually hear people's voices at this point. Feel free to ask questions of any of our panelists if they've said anything that you'd like to respond to, or just to the room in general, I guess. I think we've got a good start to the conversation. I have another slide. There, now we officially have open discussion. Okay.
I guess one thing I'd say is that draw attention to is the way in which the two questions are kind of interrelated. You know, whether or not we should regard students as consumers, your answer to that question might depend on what you think higher education's role in society is. And I think that part of what I find challenging as a professor here is that when I began working here 26 years ago, EKU was a public university in the sense that 75% or so of its operating budget came from state appropriations, and the other 25% was from tuition. And now those numbers have just about reversed themselves. And the cost of education has been shifted onto the shoulders of students increasingly. And so, and it seems to me that this has changed the dynamics of the institution. And I also think we might need, and so I guess I'll just throw out this. I think that the concept of the post-public university should become part of our conversation about higher education in this country, because it seems to me that EKU is not in a unique position insofar as there are similar institutions around the country who were established decades ago, and we could talk about, well, what were the reasons why they were established? But bottom line is that legislators and taxpayers thought it would be a good idea for there to be public post-secondary education, and that legislators in the past 25 years have decided, evidently, that might not be such a good idea. But it doesn't seem to me that there's really been a conversation about that. And so it's left us in the situation of kind of pretending to be a public university when we're not really anymore. And this is why I think these conversations are important. I don't want to hold the microphone for too long, but let me say one more point briefly with respect to whether we should regard students as consumers. I would say yes and no. I think that ideally I would say no, because I think that we should regard students at a public university as citizens who are, I had thought of myself as a civil servant whose job it was to educate the next generation of citizens of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, primarily. But if that's not, then if we're a company now and students are customers, I mean, companies exist to make a profit. And so it makes me a little bit unclear about what my role in the institution is meant to be. And another thing I'll just say is I just happen to be, every once in a while, I don't know how many people do this, but I every once in a while read the lyrics to the alma mater, which is a little bit dated. It says, "Hail to thee, our alma mater, faithful guide of youth, holding high amid the darkness, duty, light, and truth." Those are the opening words of our alma mater. And then at the end, it says, "Happy days within thy shadow, friends and comrades we have won. Fill our hearts with exaltation for thy work so nobly done." And so it seems to me like this alma mater is saying that the role of faculty is to be the faithful guide of youth and to lead them towards light and truth, which is almost, I mean, that's pretty spiritual language that talks about and I've always thought that was kind of like my job. So there's that. And then the other thing that concerns me about the students as consumer model is, like you were saying, on that model, the customer is always right. But we have these pillars out here that say knowledge and wisdom, and presumably people are coming here to acquire knowledge and wisdom. Well, how can that be? How can the customer always be right if the customer lacks the knowledge of wisdom that they've come here to acquire? It seems as though if we believe in the traditional role of this institution, then we should believe that, and I don't know, this might be a hard thing for students to, but it seems to me that as faculty, we kind of have to believe that we've spent years acquiring some knowledge and some credentials that we have to offer to students, and that surely we should. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, I think that in light of the current financial realities of higher education, we do have to think of students as consumers, because they are paying money to be able to come here. And we have to be realistic about what it's costing people to be able to come here and be respectful of that. But at the same time, I think that we need to be mindful of current financial realities. We also have to be wanting, I think, to have the kind of conversation that this event is meant to have about, why were these institutions created? And if they no longer exist for the reason that they were originally created, then why do we exist? What is our mission as a post-public university? I think that question needs clarification, and I think that these kinds of conversations are important for trying to clarify that.
I had no idea Professor Gooch would hold opinions on this matter, but there it is. And so that was very, yeah, I don't know that there was a question in that, but I want to give the panelists a chance to, no, that was great. I want to give the panelists a chance to react to that, if any of you have anything to say.
I think there's a high level of frustration among myself and a lot of students in being treated like, weirdly, both a consumer and a product. There's some kind of, you all are going to have to back me up on this. There's some semi-predatory practices in a lot of universities towards trying to get us to give them more money, shockingly. And it's extremely frustrating. I pretty much am here exclusively on scholarships and through working several jobs in tandem. And so a lot of my choice to be here at Eastern was finance-based because they used to offer full merit scholarships. And I was like, that's pretty great. I can do that. And now there's this distinct feeling of pure frustration whenever I get my itemized bill every semester and I look at it and it's like, fee for breathing the air on campus, fee for throwing things away in a trash can, fee for having more credit hours than we say you need, except it's the number that you need so that you pass in 4 years. And it's at this point, I am so disenchanted with this fact of like, but you're doing this university a noble thing by coming here and I'm like, no, I'm giving them my money and I'm having a fantastic experience exclusively through the wonderful faculty here, not by virtue of the university as a business, only by virtue of a business in that it employs you all, I suppose, who really are what make university worth it for me.
No, that's a great thing to bring up, Addie. I mean, it's worthwhile, thinking about, if the metaphor is student as consumer, then it does become, as Professor Gooch indicated, higher ed as business, right? And then you get into the devil in the details where fees, how student financial aid is paid out, right? I know that there's been some dissension about that and some fear and anxiety about that. So that's all really important conversations to be having. I'm going to check in with do we have any chat questions or comments?
Dr. Callahan said, consumerism works both ways. Do you want a professor who just views students as consumers?
Do you want to, anybody on Zoom want to hop on, or Ann, do you want to elaborate on that?
I teach at EKU because I love teaching, and my approach to teaching is to engage in relationship. I want to have feedback from students to improve myself. So there is some element of consumerism involved in knowing that I'm creating a product. I work my heart out to make this a solid product that people want to consume and grow from, engaging. But I feel like this conversation can also lead to a sense of treating students as just objects. Just we focus so much on the student, we don't focus as much on the professor and the corrosive effect that it has on professors' morale and their desire to go the extra mile. When I'm a social worker, I'm not a business person. I want to have a job, and I want to do my job well, but I also wonder what happens to the professor in all this. I've seen professors that have gotten burnt out and they're detached and they use AI to grade things, which is to me unconscionable. It might save time, but to me that is just one more example of the detachment and the objectification process that this hyper sensitivity to the consumerism model has led to. To me, it's depersonalizing what the whole reason I got into education in the first place, the whole reason why I teach at EKU it's because I care, and it's almost like I need to have an AI computer to help care for me now, and I don't know, I'm just rambling. It's distressing to me.
One
Why I'm
topic,
here.
AI is going to be our next forum, I think, Dr. Callahan. So one topic at a time, maybe, but yeah.
I guess really my question would be to the students here. What are your thoughts on that regarding the impact on professors? I don't want to ask too many questions to confuse or muddy the waters. I just wonder, do you think that have you seen any differences in your professors that might view students as a consumer?
Well, I think if I can actually blend what Dr. Callahan is saying with what Dr. Gooch was saying, it's interesting that you brought up alma mater, nourishing mother, right? That's a metaphor that we can talk about. And of course, the danger with that one is that of infantilization. And I've certainly seen faculty-student interactions that I feel like were infantilizing, right? That you're not actually giving one of my pet peeves of college professors referring to the kids in their class, the 18, 19, 20-year-old adult learners in their classes as kids, right? And so there's a danger in that metaphor, but there is also, I think, a danger of instrumentalization or objectification that Dr. Callahan was talking about. So does anybody want to take that up?
Can I say something?
Yes. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. I actually have had Dr. Callahan as a professor. And I think that she does a wonderful job building relationships with students. She accepts feedback well. If, like, for example, if I was not, like, if my mind did not process her directions, I knew that I could reach out to Dr. Callahan and explain to her how my mind is processing them. And she would work with it to where everybody understood what was going on. If that meant she had to change what she wrote from the beginning of the semester to where we were now, she was more than willing to accept that feedback. I do think that having teachers who don't look at us consumers, but as individual people with our own learning styles, our own personalities, how we respond to certain things, I feel like that builds a better rapport and support system for us to continue on, especially with a graduate degree. It is not easy by any means. And I'm completely online, so I don't get to see anybody face to face unless I travel to UKU. So I think having that mindset of building that rapport with the students is phenomenal. And to do away with that, I think would be detrimental to those who are online.
Yeah, and thanks for bringing up that issue, because I think that is the issue of online learning. And I know, and which I think is related to AI for what it's worth, but that really is a separate topic. But I think online learning for sure plays into this because it gets at the economics, kind of what Addie was talking about with how tuition and fees are levied against students. Online learning becomes this opportunity, I think, for very profit-driven education and profit-driven class structures. But I think it also illustrates the complexities of what we're talking about, because I know a lot of students like Kayla who would not otherwise have the opportunity and access to education were it not for the fact of online education. So I think it speaks to, this is not a clear kind of dialectic that of good or bad, but it is very much continuum of how we want to view these relationships. And then I had a question in there as well, and I lost it. So I'm going to throw it back out to the floor. We have about 9 minutes. No, yes, 9 minutes left.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi.
Hi, Kelly.
First of all, just thank you, students. Like the thought that you put into all these responses have just been amazing. Yeah, I feel better about the future coming to this event. But I also wanted to just mention, so a lot of what you talked about earlier with the banking model of education, where you come here and we just pour stuff into you for information and you just absorb it. And I'm sorry if I missed this, I don't know what your assigned readings were, but Frere was a philosopher who talked about this banking model and how like non-conducive it is to learning. That students learn through active interaction and through creation, and Bell Hooks built on that too. And so like something that is an example of a banking model is we give you a textbook and you just read it all and you're supposed to like absorb it, versus classes that don't use textbooks and maybe do more rich assignments where you go out and find information or create things. I'm wondering if that has been your experience, if you've had experiences like that with classes where you felt like the assignments you had to do were really just about you kind of like absorbing stuff.
Okay. Do you get the question? Anybody have a? I'm looking at Courtney and Walker, I think, because you guys haven't. Walker, do you want to?
So for a bit of context, I wasn't originally an English major when I started attending school here. I was an English teaching major. My mindset was very much that I'm going to get a degree and it's going to directly enable me to get a certain type of job that I'm interested in. And within those types of classes and approaching things with that mindset, the thing is, like, the university was approaching that curriculum with that mindset as well. Like, this is a degree that's going to enable students to get a very specific type of job immediately after they graduate. It was a lot of read the textbook and then do these prescribed tasks that aren't necessarily creative or insightful or encourage you to think about things in an interesting way. Fill the mold, move on, you get your credit hours and you go. And my experience with that as a student is that that's really, really, really unfulfilling. It's very demotivating. It's not interesting. It's not stimulating. You don't feel like you're learning anything. Compared to like my experience in the English department, where things are a lot more open-ended. There's not so much like certainty about like what you're going to learn or how you're going to learn it. You find that out along the way in a way that works for you. So I feel like one of those is definitely a lot more effective for like feeling like you're actually getting an education. And it's not the other, it's not the first one.
You don't remember when I gave you the multiple choice question, what is literature, at the beginning of this? No, I'm just kidding, right? I mean, you ask that question, you see the absurdity of it. Any other responses to Kelly's question about the sort of nature of the assignment structure? And Kelly, I want to check in with you. I think you were talking about Paulo Freire, right? At the beginning of your, we kind of lost. Yeah. Okay. So critical pedagogy. Yes. Excellent. Which itself would take us down a whole other path, but okay. I think we have time for about one more comment or question. If anybody's got it. Speak now or forever hold your peace, at least until the next AAUP forum. Dr. Marion?
Her comment earlier resonated with me about, teaching folks as a public good being that we would graduate critical thinkers that would contribute to society. So my succinct answer is the Buckeye in me. The land grant system in this country was largely formed because the United States Civil War pretty much said we don't know how to do agriculture without using people excessively. So let's figure out how to do things better. And so one of the land grants that I think highly of, their motto is education for citizenship. And that's actually their new strategic plan. But it's been on their motto forever. So they're trying to get back to that. I think they have to emphasize it because that's truly like, you know, what I think that maybe they thought we've lost in society. And even though it's on the motto or the alma mater got stuff out there, the fact that we have to start really, you know, and right now, that's something that I think that nationally people realize that we've had a breakdown in civics and citizenship. And I don't think that that's something that is particularly, I don't think politically, regardless of where somebody's at, that there's much disagreement on that. I think there's a collective agreement. Maybe some see more obvious examples of where there's more of a breakdown, but I think society in general across the board thinks that we could do better with respect to citizenship and civics. And I think that higher education helps enable those conversations, even for those that don't have the good fortune by the way the world works to be able to experience higher education. They're still beneficiaries of this public good. And I'm delighted that we were able to have this conversation today. And again, to echo Ann and others, y'all as students, it was really encouraging to hear your perspectives and honesty, and it was really rewarding. So thank you.
Well, I'm going to have to talk with Dr. Marion later about what he means by breakdown of civic order. I mean, I don't know about you all, but I was economically liberated yesterday. So, I mean, I'm living my best life. Fortunately, my students who are good critical thinkers know what sarcasm and irony is all about. So there you go. Do any of you all have a response to Dr. Marion's comments about maybe, you know, fundamentally, and I think Dr. Gooch brought this up too, thinking about the history of universities themselves and having an awareness of how it is that land-grant universities or, you know, EKU starting out as a normal school actually impacts us the way that you think about your experience here. I don't know if any of you have any 2-minute responses to that. Okay, I think maybe that's a great place to end it with then, because I have a meeting to get to at 6. So I'm going to be rushing out the door. But yeah, absolutely. I appreciate everyone who turned up on Zoom and turned out in person today. I think this, all things considered, this was a good turnout and a great discussion, and hopefully we can find ways to carry this on.